Bruce Whitfield joining me tonight, Rowan Williams and Sasha Naryshkine, taking America to the brink and dragging the rest of the world with it. The US shutdown looms large over global markets. What BMW's decision to put a brake on investments means for South Africa Incorporated. Knott Craig has an epiphany, puts pressure on his old firm, remember that, and MTN as well. Fly Safair keeps advertising, but ads are still going out on TV, despite the fact that it's grounded before liftoff even happens. And the number of African billionaires has more than doubled from 25 to 55. More coming up on tonight's Squawk. Thanks for joining us on Squawk. You're watching CNBC Africa. First in business worldwide, Rowan Williams from Nitrogen Fund Managers and Sasha Naryshkine from Vestact join me on Squawk to unpack the week's biggest stories. Sasha Naryshkine, don't you wish you had a cool name like Nitrogen? Don't you wish you were oxygen? Somebody's taken that already. Nitrogen, or helium, or laughing gas.
Yeah, or carbon. You know, the building blocks come from there.
Awesome, but then
that taken?
Pravin Gordon would then tax you more. You'd have to pay even more tax than you do already.
Oh, well, I suppose there is an indirect tax on nitrogen, or not yet the air we breathe.
Not yet.
Not yet.
I'm sure somebody somewhere one day will do it.
It's coming.
Tell me about these nasty Americans who are trying to hold us to ransom.
Yeah, as far as I understand it, there is subset inside of the Republican Party.
The Tea Party.
The Tea Party, who've been struggling, and somehow a junior senator from Texas thinks that this is the best way to get votes, is by strutting your stuff in Washington. Although the polls show, the Gallup, Gallup,
absolutely.
one of the best people, that support for the Republican Party, or dislike, as it were, is at an all-time high and supports at an all-time low. Obviously, the two are separate reports, would you believe it? And they've been collecting data since 1992. So even George W. and his father
were more popular than the Republican Party is right now. And it all comes down to a fight over Barack Obama's Obamacare. And the Tea Party is saying, hold on a sec, you can't use taxpayers' money to give health care to poor people. What's wrong with you, crazy man? And Barack Obama's just standing up saying, I'm doing the right thing here by the American people. I'm guessing he's setting whoever his successor will be up for a win at the next US elections.
Well, so the Republicans have been very opposed to Obamacare. It managed to get through the Senate and the House, and so has become law, but now they're using other means to really oppose it. And from the Democrats' perspective, it's really the highlight of Obama's campaign, and now they're trying to shoot it down. So.
But what is the consequence of this grandstanding and blimmin' parochial political posturing? That was quite good. What is the consequence of this for us if it gets to a couple of days from here and suddenly America's got no money to pay its debts?
Well, if the Republicans look at the polls, which I'm led to believe, look at the, the groundswell suggesting that, hey, even inside of their own party, there are 58 million Americans on Social Security. So come 1 November, if they're still grappling with these issues, I can bet more than half of them, or maybe half of them, are Republicans. So, there'll be a rebellion against their own party. Then what? And then what? So I think we're probably very close to some sort of cracking point where everyone says, gee, the polls suggest that we're in the toilet here. Let's sort this out.
When has the Tea Party ever compromised on anything, though? That's the point, isn't it?
Bruce, as far as I understand it, there's a maximum of like 30 in amongst the 237 seats or whatever that they have. And, more importantly, they're midterm elections next year. So if they were looking this as a success,
Okay, but what is the worst case scenario? Ron, you've looked at this. I mean, you went back in history and had a look at what happened the last time. This was
79, I think.
79.
Yeah, it was 17 years ago where they had the last shutdown.
Yeah.
That was for, I think, it wasn't for a very long period of
21
time.
days.
Yeah.
21 days.
And there was some longer-term consequences in terms of the impact on interest rates, which were elevated afterwards. I think in the current environment, we've got increased uncertainty. You've got also elevated markets, given obviously the low interest rates and the quantitative easing.
But you got the US Fed bending over to lower interest rates. So the consequence of this action could actually push rates up. So you got effectively organs of state working against each other.
No, so that's what's the total dissonance in terms of the current bipartisan politics in the US, which I think is making people edgy because it looks like it's completely irrational. As you say, different parts of the government are working against each other. There is a silver lining, interestingly enough, is that this slowdown in federal spending may actually push out the QE tapering window.
Yes.
So it's funny, every time there's some bad news, it can be interpreted as good news.
You know what, you should really be an economist, never mind being a fund manager. Tell me about Janet Yellen. Do we like her?
Everyone's shouting about her. That's just so boring. Yeah, she's actually 7 years older than Ben Bernanke.
More hair, though.
More hair than Ben Bernanke.
She's 68 years old this
67.
year.
60. Yeah, well, there and thereabouts. Probably only going to do 2 terms,
Yeah.
7-8 years. But I think she's the best person for the job. Interesting background. She's actually from New York, so that's where that accent comes from. And a big success story. You know, I think both her parents and her husband's grandparents, and the reason why I bring him up is he's a Nobel winner of the economics prize.
When was
Imagine
that?
the
It's
2001. Yeah,
Okay.
2001.
So she's married to a Nobel Prize winning economist.
Their only kid is an economics associate professor.
So they're serious underachievers.
Serious underachievers in the economics field, but best person for the job, I think,
right.
without a doubt.
However, you talk to some the skeptics about Janet Yellen's appointment, say, look, she's going to continue to do the same as Ben Bernanke's been doing. She's been instrumental in the process in the background. In fact, she's probably been one of the architects of the ideas of QE. She's been fundamentally involved in that. The consequences of what is going on right now and perpetuating this are, we can't even comprehend in 20 years from now what the consequences of today's actions are going to be.
Well, I guess you got to look in the long term, but as Kane said, in the long term we're all dead. So
yes.
we need to consider, I think, in the shorter term, and I think they are worried about the US government and the US economy over the next 5 years before we get to the next 20 years. And so we have to survive until then. So it really does split the debate in terms of this quantitative easing. You've got those that are pro it and those that are against it. They're very concerned with the stoking of inflation and the longer term impact of this bloated balance sheet that the Fed has and how they're potentially going to unwind it, and obviously the potential asset bubbles that it is creating and will create. On the other side, you've got the consistency of the policy and the US economy, as we mentioned, in terms of this potential government shutdown and already temporary shutdown. It's negative for the US economy, so it continues to need the stimulus.
Okay, let's drop.
So
the
they
US
were
economy.
clever. They were clever at the
Brilliant.
last meeting to stymie the market and say, "Hey, we're doing nothing." And everyone's like, "Why are you doing nothing?"
Because the Republicans might
Because
come out.
they knew.
They
Exactly.
knew. They knew. You can
Yes.
never trust them. Right. So moving on. Let's look at ourselves. Let's look at South Africa. Let's look at our place in the world. Let's look at BMW's announcement in the last week that it's not going to be bidding for new business into South Africa. And in fact, all of the motor companies have actually been suddenly very vocal. The guy who runs Ford in South Africa has been very vocal about the big strike that's happened. We've had a slowdown in exports, and Jill Marcus is terribly concerned about that, of course, because our export market has fallen off a cliff. That's driving our trade balance negative, even further into the red, and our currency remains under pressure in an environment where we should actually have a little bit of strength.
It's good that business is finally starting to find their voice after years of having thought, okay, it's let's give a little bit to labour in light of labour exploitation in the past. But at the same time, I saw a very simple headline that suggested that Nissan, or was it Renault, or both, was opening up a factory in Nigeria with a local partner.
That was yesterday's announcement.
Exactly. So what does that mean? Does that mean
they're going to be making cars in Nigeria is what it means.
Well, that's what it means. But what does it mean for our automotive industry, which is a core part? And we actually overpay for motor vehicles here because of protectionism. And because the industry was encouraged to come in Port Elizabeth and East London, which you know well, Bruce, because there's nothing else there. Huh?
Exactly. Bye-bye. You're never going to be able to go back again. I beg your pardon. So we got a situation here where investors are telling government, look, we can't invest in an environment which is hostile.
I think it's, like I said, I think it's good that businesses found their voice, because only when it hurts you where it counts the most, and that's in your wallet, by way of lower export revenue, etc., that you stand up and we're going to have to start paying more for our issued debt. That's when you pay attention. When investors suddenly say, no thanks. And it can happen very, very quickly.
It can happen very quickly. I know the Treasury is really concerned about it, but the rest, other arms of government are less concerned. It would seem, or express less urgency in their view. We're talking about feeding it in the back pocket. Here's Knott Craig. Used to run Vodacom, set Vodacom up, helped define the rules of telecommunications in South Africa post-1994, and suddenly saying, I don't like the rules I created, let's change them because they no longer suit me. It's fabulous.
So it's one of the great turnaround kind of stories.
Turnaround in opinion or turnaround in
opinion, obviously. I mean, he was partly the architect of the global termination rate regime, and now he's vehemently opposed to it, and obviously to the potential benefit of his new employer, Cell C. So I think he's actually done quite a good job. He clearly did a good job at Vodacom, and he's taken those skills. He's doing a good job in terms of convincing ICASA that the smaller players do need the subsidization, and clearly from the reaction from the market and what we've seen from Vodacom and MTN, they're very unhappy with the kind of dispensation that ICASA has granted them.
Well, here you've got a situation where they want to cut interconnect fees. In other words, if I phone you from a Cell C number on MTN, I've got to pay you 40 cents. They want to cut that down to 10 cents in order to do it. The big beneficiary out of this is Telkom, Sasha.
Gee, Bruce, you're being a little bit generous there, saying the big beneficiary. They only own like 1-2% of the market in terms of the
interconnect fees, the mobile stuff, yes, but from a landline to connect.
And landlines have been shrinking. Number of minutes on landlines spoken have been shrinking.
There are still something like 10 million minutes spoken every year. It's a lot.
Fixed line penetration in South Africa is 7.5%. ADSL lines, they don't even have 1 million. If you add MTN and Vodacom's data users together, it's 30 million plus. So where Telkom hasn't been able to offer people the internet solution, guess who has been doing it? The mobile companies. So that's where I think you're being generous. The reason I say that is because we're moving in a direction of more and more and more data consumption, and you're going to use your phone less for voice. So, maybe the termination rates comes and coincides with that at a good time.
But Telkom has seen a very strong upsurge in its share price, 27.50 from the lows of 13.50. Effectively, it's doubled over the last 6 months. It's not all
good
about
for
interconnect
us,
fees.
Because we're essentially indirect holders.
We're 30% shareholders.
39.5 or something. Nearly 40.
I feel rich.
Yes.
As a taxpayer, I feel rich. Finally, it's worthwhile. But it's doing a better job at running that particular business. In the airline space, of course, here we've got ComAir, which has put a stake in the ground along with Rodney James, who is one of the founders of One Time. They take Fly Safair to court and say, you're telling porcupines about your shareholding structure. And the rules in South Africa require you to have 75% local ownership. It sounds like sour grapes on behalf of ComAir, but what they're really frightened of is that if you can allow the rules to be broken for Fly Safair, then we've got an open skies policy, and ComAir, which has just spent $2.5 billion or something on aeroplanes over the next 10 years, has a big problem on its hands.
Bruce, I mean, maybe we need to rethink the rules, but to go back to ComAir, they've been operational for 67, 68 years. It's one of the few airlines globally that has basically financial records that are better than all of their peers. So they must be doing something right. And if they're playing by the rules and saying, look, those are external shareholders, those are the rules. So, if the rules get changed...
You're investing in that rule environment and you're sticking to the rules, you are prejudiced if others are allowed to come in and flaunt those rules.
But are you suggesting that we own airline stocks? What did Warren Buffett say if there was a capitalist at Kitty Hawk?
He would have shot down the Wright brothers and saved investors billions of dollars over many, many years. But here's ComAir. It's up to about R2.70 or thereabouts. It's had a fairly nice run, but it's got to run in an environment where it's got pricing power, because only it, of course, and the mighty South African Airways with its Mango brand and ComAir with Glue.com have got the rights to the skies effectively on the main routes. Since One Time went down, we've been paying a lot more for flying on aeroplanes.
Well, I guess ComAir would say you're paying economic rates because they need to make a return on their investment. But clearly they're in a bit more of a competitive advantage, or maybe potentially a monopolistic situation. They're going to do everything they can to keep out competition. Because it is those low barriers to entry that road ticket price is good for the consumer but bad for the shareholder. Absolutely. So they're going to protect their their shareholder base.
I'm just tempted to see I'm really interested to see whether or not SAA, in probably the least competitive environment in a decade, is able to actually turn a profit this time around. Because we're shareholders there. We don't want our gain on Telkom to be offset by more losses
I
at
spoke
SAA.
to a pilot who had flown for them, I think, for 37 years, and he said every single year was like this, implying that they hadn't turned a profit really in their whole existence because of the shareholder structure, not answerable really to anyone.
Is the mandate to deliver a profit or to deliver airline services? And the mandate,
well,
I think,
it's
is
to bring
airline
people
services.
here, and anyone who knows their geography knows we're a long, long way away from everywhere else.
Yeah. But you look at the structure of an airplane ticket, half of it is the price of the ticket and the other half is
But
taxes.
people will fight over $50 for their trip to Durban, but yet will pay 50 Rand for a golf ball or whatever it is.
Which you then lose.
Exactly. You hit it once and it goes in. In my case, That's why I haven't hit one in 10 years.
Exactly. I hit one the other day, and I'm really sorry to the family who I nearly hit with the golf ball. If you're watching, I apologise profusely. So, who is South Africa's richest man? Sorry, Sasha. Sorry, Rowan. Sorry,
Sorry, Bruce.
Sorry, Anton. Very sorry, my dear family. It's not us. It's somebody else, and we'll talk about that in just a moment.